Greetings, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 34 with Josué Cardona. He is the founder of the Geek Therapy Podcast Network, a great space for combining things that people love, video games, board games, all things geeky, and just kind of bringing some critical analysis and advocating for mental health, which is just a great cause, and just really appreciate what they're doing over there. And Josué just kind of geeks out about all sorts of stuff in this episode, and he's looking forward to E3, so hopefully you enjoyed all the good announcements from your thing. So if you haven't noticed, some of our episodes are on a little bit of a kind of time delay, totally intentional, like to record a little bit early and kind of giving myself some runway. So this one was from about a month ago, but still a great evergreen conversation about all the work that he has done and his professional path, which is an interesting one. So just plug in and enjoy this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, number 34, with Josué Cardona.
Hey there, listeners. It's an honor to have our good friends at SwiftKick be a sponsor of the podcast because I've seen their work firsthand, and it's truly unlike any student leadership training I've experienced. They've been voted Best Student Leadership Program unprecedented 5 times, so you know they must be doing something right. As a bonus for our listeners, SwiftKick is giving a $500 discount off their normal speaking fee if you mention Higher Ed Geek when you contact them. I highly recommend their trainings for your campus, as your students will be talking about it for months afterwards. It's really great stuff. Check them out, swiftkick.hq.com, to learn more, and let them know I sent you. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, I'm really excited to just kind of talk with you about kind of your podcasting journey and just kind of your professional path and stuff, and just break away a little bit from kind of my usual more kind of higher ed related guests, but we'll sort of get into your college background and all that stuff. But
Sure.
Yeah, so I mean, just for the sake of time, I mean, we'll dive in here. If you just want to just give an introduction of yourself and kind of the quick version of sort of your professional journey and how you got to be where you are today.
Yeah, so my name is Josué Cardona. I run geektherapy.com. We do a lot of podcasts, but we do content that basically it was the basis for it is how geek culture can save the world. So people who are using their geeky interest to help other people is really where it came from. And then over the years, we've had a focus on mental health because at some point in my life, I went from being an engineer to a mental health professional. We can get into that in a second.
Yeah. And yeah, I know, you have kind of like a whole sort of network of podcasts that are all sort of like different relations on that core premise, which I love. So I guess, we'll kind of go chronologically through your path a little bit. So like going back to kind of your origin story, like in college and those kind of formative years, like what were things that happened then that were really kind of meaningful for you, like, personally and or professionally, that you feel like still kind of like resonate with you today?
Man, I have such a complicated relationship with school in general. But when I went to college, I studied engineering, mechanical engineering. And I went to a university where there was an arrogance among the engineering professors that I didn't like. And it was kind of this idea of like, well, don't worry, like once you become an engineer, it's really a desk job and you'll be telling other people what to do. Like it's all about your ideas, but I wanted to do some hands-on stuff. So I ended up transferring after a year to a technical program where I looked at it in every single, it was like 3 out of 4 classes had a lab. And that really mattered to me. I didn't discover until many years later that I had ADHD and I was falling, and that's why that's probably the reason why I was falling asleep in every single class throughout high school and college until I found these classes that were super technical and hands-on, and I was able to really get my hands dirty, and I loved it. And I finished my degree in electronics engineering technology really quickly, and then I went and started working for the federal government, actually.
Interesting. And so I guess from there to where you are now, like what were maybe those like moments or, maybe even specifically, because it's something that I'd want to talk a little bit more in depth about, of just like, getting to the point where you start, doing podcasting. So like you're out working in the field, you've, finished your education and everything. I guess those like early career moments, and then like, how did this kind of podcasting endeavor come to be?
So I was working, and my employer, which is the federal government at this point, they were offering to pay for additional schooling, and really everybody was getting an MBA. So I thought, you know what, I'm gonna get an MBA too. And I was almost done with my MBA, and they cut the funding. So I ended up paying for my own. I think it was an accounting and finance course that I ended up paying for myself, and I hated it so much that I thought, you know what, if I'm already willing to, or I think I had I had to get a loan. Like I tapped into student loans to be able to pay for that class. I thought, you know what, that was really easy. I now have access to student loans, and I'm enjoying studying. Maybe I should study something that I really want to study. And so in the same university, I was like, you know what, I loved psychology in high school. I want to do something different professionally. I want to help people out. So I transferred to a mental health counseling program, and I started that program while I was still an engineer. And when I finished all my core classes and I had to start my internship, I quit my engineering job, and I started doing my internships and my practical part of my master's degree. I never finished the MBA, by the way. I still regret that. I was so close. Yeah. But I started doing, again, my internship. And it was during that time when I was a mental health counseling intern that I started working with kids this was in New Jersey. And I started working with kids in a program. And I started noticing that all these kids all they talked about were comic book characters and video games. And I thought, hey, I know what they're talking about. I speak that language. I can talk to them about the things that they like. So I really connected with them. And as I continued my internship, I thought of ideas of different ways that I could integrate that into the kind of treatment programs that we were running. So I found out that my internship location had a Nintendo Wii at the time. And we had a new supervisor, and she had taken the Wii and kind of like locked it up. And I found it one day when I was looking for something, and I asked her, like, hey, I have some ideas. Can we use the Nintendo Wii to do some group work with the kids? She was like, absolutely not. We're not going to touch video games. Video games are dangerous, and all this like negative things that people believe about video games. And I was like, that really bothered me. So like as an act of rebellion, I went home that night and I created a website that just like to prepare my argument.
Right.
So I just got a bunch of supporting information, not just research, but also just like regular articles that you saw people talking about, like positive examples of people using video games and comic books and technology and different things that I considered really geeky interests, and the way that people were using them to help people in health and mental health and all sorts of things, social movements, things like that. So that's kind of where geektherapy.com started. That's where originally was just a curated website. And then eventually I wanted to talk to other people who I was reading about in those articles. So I started a podcast, because a podcast is the best way to just walk up to people and say, hey, can I ask you some questions? And so, that was like 7 years ago when the podcast started. And over the years, we've built a really big community, and lots of different people represented in that community. And over time, we expanded, and now we have a bunch of different podcasts that touch on, a lot of them focus on mental health, but we have 2 gaming podcasts, one for video games, one for tabletop, one focused on technology. We have one that's like exploring fictional characters through the lens of mental health. We have one that's focused very much on family dynamics and family therapy and things like that. And it's really cool that the community has come together and it's grown into this thing that I really, really love.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I guess it's like interesting. Yeah. Like that part of your story of like when you were kind of like paying for really like, paying for your education more on your own, like you kind of were like, you know what, I'm going to do a thing that I really enjoy, I'm really interested in, and kind of see where that takes me. And then I think, now like sort of mental health and mental wellness and just having those conversations are a lot more, prevalent than they've been. There's certainly still a long way to go to kind of break down stigmas and just improve, accessibility and stuff. But at least just having those conversations that people know, like, there's a lot of different ways to kind of process the emotions that you feel, and just to have like a supportive community and kind of looking at like stories and things in a critical way. And
yeah, it's just great that you've been able to sort of, nurture that community and that kind of part of yourself. And, because I think, like you're saying, like a podcast and, in a small sense, it's just like this good excuse to talk to people. But, for me, it kind of just scratches the itch of like, having these kind of good conversations that I like having with people about the things that they're interested in. And, I think it's helpful for people to have those hobbies. And, some people are just, they maybe have never had time for it and they've struggled to find it, but, you're providing like a platform for people to, engage in meaningful ways and have that community and just, sometimes just have fun together and like talk about fun stuff. But, it's really cool. And I guess, maybe just talk a little bit more about that, sort of where you are now currently and kind of what you enjoy about, you've been working on this, on like Geek Therapy for several years. And I know sometimes for me, it's like, you might get to a point where it could be kind of like tiring or hard or difficult or, new different problems crop up and stuff and just other stuff that you're kind of working on right now. Like what keeps you engaged? What keeps you kind of ready to keep at it day after day? Like what do you enjoy most about it?
Ooh, yeah. So Geek Therapy started as me just wanting to connect with people that I guess maybe I was too shy to just call people up and do like an interview, like just a normal interview, like for my own sake. And a podcast gave me an excuse. But eventually I started getting so into the quality of podcasting. And I love podcasts. I've been listening. I forgot when exactly I listened to my first podcast, but it was an IGN.com podcast. I remember I was on their forums and they started talking about this thing called a podcast that they were doing. And so I've been listening to podcasts now for maybe 10 years, and it's something that I constantly listen to every day. I love them. So once I started making them, I started getting really into, I don't know, the art of podcasting, like the quality. And so eventually the way to keep it fresh was that I stopped interviewing people because it got frustrating, like sound quality wouldn't be good or like all these things that I couldn't control. But I felt so comfortable in the space that I started bringing on other people to talk to. And kind of maybe, so maybe one of the ways that I was able to stay engaged and keep going was just to switch things up. There's this episode of really early episode of Geek Therapy where I haven't posted an episode in a while, and I say like, look, this is what we're gonna do from now on. This is how I'm changing it. It's gonna be focused on storytelling. And then 6 months after that, I came back and did something else because I never did that thing that I wanted to do. But those ideas, like the idea of switching it up, kept me going, and always having other people involved was really helpful. But I think like I really believe in what I do, and that really helps me continue because there is, like I said, I have a complicated relationship with school in general, and I've learned so much over the years outside of school. There's so much that is complementary and so much that has been so helpful, and podcasts have been a big part of that for me. I've learned so much, and I feel that the content that I'm making is important. And whether anybody else thinks it's important or not, right? That's not the point. I believe it's important, and that helps me move forward and do it more often. So I do believe that there's a very important educational component. Like I'm creating awareness of topics for my listeners that, the things that they wouldn't be aware of otherwise. I'm going really deep into topics that maybe have been discussed in one way on the news, and you just know a little bit about it, but we can really go deep into it. One of my favorite things about podcasting is I do a lot of research. Sometimes between one episode and another, I'll read an entire book, and just go really deep into research because I want to, I don't know, at this point, I want to go into a conversation prepared and giving something, like I feel like I want to offer something new to the listener. There have been times where there's conversations, like now I tend to record more and then edit out a lot of things that I feel aren't as valuable. And like I used to have long intros for my podcast, and maybe they've changed over the years, but now it's like 5-second music into it real quick but that's like the type of podcast that I like, and I just I'm there for the information. And very rarely do I listen to podcasts where it's like just friends hanging out. Right. I used to, but not anymore. And so I've started making content that is more in line with that. And again, I feel that a lot of the topics that we touch are important. And it's also important for me to have very different perspectives. So even though I do a lot of the work, I rarely record anything on my own. And I record with people who are very different from me. Right now, our flagship program is renamed the original Geek Therapy podcast to GT Radio, and I added 3 people to the cast. So it's 2 men, 2 women, different sexual orientations, different religions, different races. And I feel so comfortable with that because it doesn't matter what we talk about. We have so many different perspectives. And I think that that's very valuable. So things like that, it matters to me. If we're doing something that I don't care about, it's really, really hard. Like right now we're doing a show that's over 100 episodes in, and I'm going to tone it down. Like we're moving into a seasonal format. Again, always switching things up just to keep things fresh. So by going seasonal, I'm like, okay, maybe we can do a really good 10 episode run and then take a break and then come back with some really good ideas and do that. So a podcast that we've been doing for almost 3 years now, well, technically a little over 2 years, right? 110 episodes or so. And we're going to take a break because it's starting to feel a little stale, and I don't want to do it just for the sake of doing it. And it's getting a little harder. So we're going to sit back, let it rest for a while, bring it back when we're energized to do it again. But then I still have other ideas that I want to pursue. So I'm going to, we'll do different shows in that seasonal format. So instead of one show every week for 52 weeks, maybe it'll be 5 shows for 10 weeks each. And I don't know, that kind of variety really gets me excited to continue.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in what you mentioned, just like that you get a lot from it, and like you learn and you grow. So it's like, valuable endeavor in that regard, but then like you have the confidence in the value of what you're doing. And I know sometimes it's hard because, which people should, if they have awesome comments or reviews, please let the creators know, because it's always great to hear that. But, you just also have the confidence in what you're doing, knowing it's valuable. You're doing research, you're like really taking it seriously and trying to provide, variety and just like, keep it fresh, like you were saying, and not feel, beholden to do it any one way at any point. But yeah, just those like creative hiatuses is, that's totally allowed. And again, just like it kind of, it's your project and you can kind of do it the way that you want to. Because yeah, it's just like you're saying, if you like do a different format or different kind of focus, and like that, helps you to kind of cultivate new skills. And yeah, maybe it provides kind of more for the audience and everything. But yeah, it's just like doing this work, you're, I appreciate the way that you look at it, because you're just always trying to, keep the muscles sort of like flexed and growing and all that, versus just kind of getting sort of, I don't know, just getting too stale and too like just doing the same thing over and over. But so it's all very cool to hear. And,
you just said something about like interacting with your audience and the community, right? Like, please, let us know if you like what we're doing. And the irony of that is like, I listen to so many things and I rarely write in or comment or do anything. I just show up and I love the content. So I've been struggling for years with how do we do that, as especially in podcasting, right? But like YouTube has the comments built in and it's all one platform, and there's a culture there that people they're putting thumbs up or thumbs down. They're subbing, they're commenting whether they like it or not. It's very different than when you're doing a podcast. And I've struggled with that for years. And just recently, as in like a week or two ago, we launched a message board, essentially a forum. And I tied all of the podcasts, every single episode. I went back. It was hundreds of episodes across all of our different shows. And I tied them all back to this one forum, because I thought, man, like we get feedback, but sometimes it's on Twitter, sometimes it's on Facebook, sometimes it's an email, and all that stuff is, that word ephemeral. It's here and then it's gone. And then nobody else sees it. There isn't a discussion. It's really just people reacting once and then that's gone. So now we created a forum, and by tying it all into a place where not only is all of our content basically linked to, so if you go to each of our podcasts has a different website, but if you go to one of them, now at the bottom, instead of writing a comment, there's a link that says, discuss this on the forum. It'll take you to a topic just for that episode, so that it doesn't matter when you listen to the episode or choose to comment on it or choose not to comment on it, just look at it. You'll see what other people had to say over time. And at the same time, you'll see other things like, that don't have anything to do with the podcast, but the community is there to be able to really interact and talk. And it took us years to figure out something that would work. I was really hesitant about what to do, and it's only been a couple weeks, but I think it's working. I think we've had more like interaction with our listeners and members of our community in the last week or two than we ever have. Actually, we've been doing this for years, and it's super exciting, but it's really hard to, like, that's part of it, right? How do you keep going? As much as it doesn't matter how much you love it, it does get to a point where, like, is anybody listening? Does anybody care? And if nobody lets you know, it is sometimes hard to go on. I think you should persevere and get through that. That's like your mind, that's your self-doubt getting in your way. But really, this really worked for us. It was something that I think was missing, and it's really helped a lot, because like it's really about building community, right? All of these things are about all these shared experiences and all these shared interests that we can bring everybody together somehow. And I don't know, it's a struggle, but I think we're figuring out a way to do it that works for our community.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and it's funny that it's like kind of going old school, like going into forums like you're mentioning, like with the IGN. A lot of sites like we'll still have them, but it's just like that kind of platform has been around forever. But it's like, hey, it works. Like it gets people talking, and it's all kind of just there. You can see the discussion all the way from the beginning. So that's great. Yeah, and but I think it is. It's tough because I think, like, the review platforms on iTunes or where, like, it's not super user friendly, and also the creator does not get any sort of like notification when somebody reviews their show on iTunes, as much as it's obviously super helpful. But yeah, it's just like, oh well, this person wrote a review months ago, I didn't even realize. Like, yeah.
I get geek out so much about that because there's actually different countries. So if somebody in a different country reviews your podcast and you go in iTunes in the USA store, you'll never see that review posted. So there may be reviews for your podcast that you've never even seen. There's a service, I can tell you about it. There's a service that you can pay for that will actually, a guy created a whole thing where you can get notified of every single review that comes in from every single iTunes store in the world. But it's not easy, and you got to pay for it.
Right. Yeah. We'll have to talk offline about that. But I guess you'd mentioned the Nintendo Wii, so I'm not sure if you're a big Nintendo fan, but just sort of moving on from the work that you're doing, like just personally, like what are the things that you geek out about currently? If it's stuff that you've like always been into, or maybe more recent discoveries, what's sort of like catching your attention right now?
So we're in the first week of June, and E3 is about to come up. So E3 is an electronic entertainment expo, and that is my Christmas. It is my favorite time of year every year. Yeah, I love video games. Video games have been something that is, core to my family since I was a kid. My earliest memories are playing video games with my parents. And to this day, now my parents, we all play games together, like even just mobile games. We're competing every week. It is a core part of my family and just who I am. So right now, my hype levels are off the charts for E3. I love it. It is again my favorite time of year. So yeah, video games are pretty much what's on my mind right now. Although we also just had the Apple Worldwide Developers Conference. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things where like I make sure to watch those press conferences live. Sometimes they're cringeworthy, but I love just watching all the new tech announcements and all the, that's like me at my nerdiest is pretty much this time of year.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then there's also like Comic-Con coming up and a lot of other like stuff like that. But
yeah. I'm going to San Diego Comic-Con and I cannot wait. I haven't been in a couple years. Whew. Super excited.
Yeah, there you go. I can imagine. Yeah, because it's just like like the Apple Developers Conference stuff is like it's just a business presentation, but yeah, like they'll try to like do these goofy things, and it's like at least cringe-inducingly entertaining at times. But it's just like just seeing the cool new stuff that they're working on is always cool.
I live for that stuff, for patch notes and update notes, and I love it.
Yeah, well, because I think that I've always seen like I'll try to just like catch the sort of synopsis that like whatever site I'll kind of grab has afterwards, and there's like usually something buried in there, like in those kind of like patch notes that's like really appealing to me. I'm just like, oh, okay, that's cool. Oh, okay, yeah, they're finally doing that, or like, oh, I use that thing every day and they're making it easier, whatever. So yeah, it's always cool. And I'm a big Apple fan. They're always doing good stuff. So but I guess Yeah, I guess you already kind of mentioned like gaming. I mean, like if you want to like maybe give an example, anything that you can think of, maybe how like gaming or anything like that, like in terms of like your family or friends or just like other community, because I guess it's been part of like your podcast network and that kind of stuff too. But just like any one little anecdote maybe of just like how your hobbies have like positively contributed to your life, like how that kind of resonates with you, since it's obviously just been this ongoing thing. And similar to me, yeah, like I've gamed my entire life and it's helped build, friendships and community, and I move around a lot, but it's like I can always have a soft landing with, gaming or one thing or another. But any anecdote like that, I guess, that you can think of with like gaming or something else.
Yeah, I mean, so many. I think one of the coolest things that's happening right now is that me and my entire family are playing this mobile game called Disney Emoji Blitz. And my sister started playing it. She's like, Josué, you have to check this out. So I start playing and we start getting really competitive. And I go and I teach my mom how to play it, and she gets into it. And now she is like the number one player in the family. We can't beat her. Oh, sometimes we beat her. And then my dad got into it recently. And my mom and my dad have been divorced for over 20 years. And they weren't friends on Facebook, but they became friends on Facebook just so they could play this game against each other. Wow. And it is like the coolest thing. So now every week on our leaderboards, our whole family is there every week, and we're trying to battle each other, and we text each other about like new events and prizes and things like that. And that sense of community is just huge. And me too. Like I've moved around so much, and I still have so many friends that I play with. And sometimes even just something as simple as comparing trophies at times makes me feel connected to other people. Just recently, I picked up Rock Band 4 for the PS4, and that game came out like 3 years ago. But it was on sale recently, so I put it in. I start playing, and then I see that one of my best friends has a bunch of high scores on it, and suddenly I'm trying to beat his high scores, and I'm sure he hasn't played the game in over 2 years. But I texted him, and I started sending him pictures of the high score and how I was getting close to him, and then how I beat his high scores. It was so fun, and again, it was like asymmetrical, but it was just, you still feel connected, and I love that, But I think the thing I love the most about games, there's a book by Jane McGonigal called Reality is Broken. Have you read this book?
I have not. I'll put it in the show notes though, and it's another good addition for my like wish list here.
Oh yeah, and she has Jane McGonigal has a TED Talk where she touches on some of these aspects. But basically, her argument in the game, that reality is broken. My interpretation of it has always been that the world is not designed in such a way that is as engaging and rewarding as video games are. This is her argument. And so there's so many things in that the video games do better and that the real world could learn from. And she gives tons of examples. I mean, the book's about 7 or 8 years old now, so there's some things that are a little outdated, but the core principles are still there. Like gaming, there's so many things that we can learn from, apply in different areas, and it'll be super beneficial. And like one of my obsessions lately has been a game called Monster Hunter World. And we did a podcast episode on our video game podcast, and I called it, instead of Monster Hunter, I called it Mastery Hunter, because for the first time in a long time, I spent as much time studying this game and learning about it, watching tutorials, reading wikis, working out strategies, as I did playing the game. And all told, we're talking now, I think maybe over 200 hours now, if I include all the time I've spent studying. And it was so rewarding and so much fun. And I knew, like, there were times when I would sit down and instead of watching something on TV, I'd go on YouTube and watch another tutorial or rewatch a tutorial. And sometimes I would spend time in a training area just trying to get better. It's a type of game where your character doesn't really like beef up their stats or anything. It's you, the player, that gets better. Your skill improves. And there's so many systems and things inside the game. And like, I love learning. I love, like, my issues with school have always been like its lack of ability to engage me as much as I would want to. Even when I was in my master's program, I went and did additional training while I was doing my master's program to kind of fill in the gaps that I had found. Like, that's the type of person that I am. So playing this game, it is one of the most fulfilling gaming experiences I've ever had, because I don't think I've ever studied so hard to just get good at a game, and I've been loving that experience.
Wow. Yeah, as a sign of a good game. Yeah, that just like, I mean, for one, that you can play for a very long time and not get tired of it, but just sort of cultivates that like deep interest in wanting to like collect all the things, or like, yeah, like get really, good at a thing, or beat this mission or something. And yeah, I remember sometimes having those like thick strategy guides for a game, because I'm just like, okay, I need to figure out like, where am I going, how am I doing this, like, and just having that like primer on the game, and spending extra time and money to sort of supplement the gaming experience. And because some games I'm like, yeah, it's enjoyable, I just played through it and done, beat it, and I like traded it in for something else. But other ones have just like hundreds of hours of gameplay, which is like, I always appreciate it's worth the investment for sure. But that's really really great stuff. And I mean, games just bringing people together. And I like that point of like even like the asymmetrical sort of like sort of comparison, or just sort of competition, where you can see like what friends have done. Like, you don't have to all play live at the same time. You can just kind of see even like sort of outside of time, kind of how you're performing against your friends and stuff. So that's really cool. And then I guess, really quick, if anything like kind of noteworthy in addition to things that you've already mentioned, just like anything that you're reading, watching, and listening to, kind of any or all of those facets, like anything that you'd want to recommend that we can include in the show notes.
Let's see. I'm always reading, watching, and listening to something. Let me see. Something worth mentioning. I just read a book called Dying for a Paycheck, which was about kind of the effect of work on people. And I think that that's a great like contrast to Reality is Broken, which I mentioned before, which talks about, that book talks about like all the great things we can learn from video games and apply them to basically the real world, including The Office. And that book, Dying for a Paycheck, is all about the effect that work can have on people. We're talking about things that we enjoy and things that are fulfilling and super engaging. And unfortunately, like, sometimes work isn't that. And that's really sad because of how long we spend working. So that's been a book that I read recently and has been on my mind a lot.
Very good. Well, I guess, and you said you're like an avid podcast listener. Anything that is at the top of your playlist recently?
So my favorite podcast is Revisionist History by Malcolm Gladwell. And its third season just started. And I haven't even listened to it yet. There's like two or three episodes out right now, but I'm saving it because I love it so much that I really want to. I don't want to like be doing chores when I listen to it. I want to be like doing something that I can really, really pay attention when, because I love it so much. So I highly recommend Revisionist History by Malcolm Gladwell.
Very good. Yeah, I think I must have like missed that came back. Yeah, I listened to a few choice episodes of that one, so I'm actually going to add that to my playlist right now.
So good.
Well, I guess, then we'll wrap up the episode here, as we always do, just on a optimistic note. Something or things that you are looking forward to in your job, life, and or the world.
Again, E3 is my Christmas. It is the 1 week of just announcements and new stuff. And like my favorite hobby in the world, it's being celebrated, first of all, by everybody, because all the different companies are all announcing things and trying to, in a way, one up each other. But really, it's a week where everybody's telling you what to look forward to in the near and far future, where you start seeing games and things that you're gonna want to check out, and sometimes in 6 months, sometimes in 3 years. But it's such a like a celebratory experience, and just stuff that like, who doesn't want more stuff to look forward to? It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I guess, is there anything particular? Because I guess, you have like a console of choice, or I don't know if you have everything at your disposal, because I have a PS4, so I'm looking forward to any of their kind of like exclusive stuff or anything like that. Is there anything that you're hoping is announced, or you just want to see more from in particular?
Oh, Dustin, so much. I have all the consoles. I have everything. So I'm looking forward to mostly Nintendo stuff, probably. They've been pretty quiet. I have a good idea of what's coming on PlayStation, what's coming on Xbox. I'm sure there will be surprises, but I think I'm most looking forward to. I think I always look forward most to what's coming out on Switch. There's lots of good stuff that can come up. I would love a new F-Zero, a new Animal Crossing, love a Zelda expansion. Just so much. A new Metroid is really, really what I want. That would be my number one choice.
Yeah. I mean, they're always doing really cool, creative stuff over at Nintendo. So it's always neat to see. Even as somebody who hasn't played kind of deeply with a console for a little while, I at least just appreciate them in the space to be doing something very different. So yeah, it'd be cool to see what they have coming up. So cool. Well, I appreciate you taking time to hang out here and talk about all that you did. And we'll have ways for folks to connect with you and the work that you do in the show notes, as well as everything else that we mentioned. But just thank you so much. And just have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Dustin.
This podcast is a proud member of the ConnectEDU Podcast Network, bringing together diverse voices and thoughtful discussions to the higher ed community. Check us out online at connectedu.network or on Twitter at ConnectEDUPod.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. Please rate, review, and subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast.